flesh, they shall die spiritually. And then 2 Peter 1 verse 10, Christians must make their calling and election sure. They must give diligence to do this. Hebrews 3 verse 12 warns Christians to not have an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Galatians 5:4 talks about falling from grace. So the Bible mentions, there are many more examples I could give. Christians can fall from grace. They can wander from the truth. And we should not let that happen to ourselves. But sometimes we can start drifting and get too far away from the shore, and we need a rescue. And that's where brethren come into the picture. That's why he says, brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and hide a multitude of sins. I'm also thinking about Galatians chapter 6, when he says that if one is overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. We should try to go after those who wander away. We often talk about converting the lost out in the world, people who've never knew God or have not known Jesus. And that's a very great work. We're to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And people of the world need to be converted from living sinful lives to living the life of the child of God, the Christian life. But there are Christians who get weak, and if they fall away from the truth or they outright rebel against God, we need to have the same concern, or maybe even an even greater concern. I mean, we love all people, but we tend to really love our brothers and sisters in our physical home because they say blood thicker than water. I mean, we do love our families. Well, we're in the family of God, and it's not that Christians are more important than non-Christians, but we do have that special bond. And if one of our own goes astray, we need to make sure that we're doing what James says and going after the one who is in rebellion. Now, what is the remedy for this rebellion? It's called conversion. We usually talk about converting the person out in the world to Christ. But there's the case where Peter was following the Lord as an apostle, and he was being told by the Lord that he would deny the Lord 3 times, and Peter said that'll never happen. But it did happen. He denied the Lord 3 times. But before that happened, Jesus said, when you are converted, he said, Peter, I have prayed for you. Satan has desired that he might have you, that he might sift you as wheat. But Jesus said, I've prayed for you, Peter, that your faith will not fail. But he says, after you're converted, he wanted him to go and teach his brothers. Peter would need conversion after he denied the Lord. Conversion is not simply a wholesale process where we leave the world and come to Christ. It may be that we leave Christ and go back to the world and have to be brought back to Christ again. Peter tells us that it is possible for a person to go back to the world after being a Christian, and it's like a dog returning to its vomit, or a sow having washed to go back to wallowing in the mire. And so the latter end is worse than the beginning. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 through 22. But the remedy for a Christian who wanders away from the truth is for us as faithful Christians to go and convert that person back to Christ. He says, brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way. See that? It's conversion. And he says, let the person who goes after his wandering brother, let him know he's doing a good thing. Number one, he's obeying the command of God. God says, you go after that lost sheep. But he says, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death. That's eternal death. That's going to hell. And we snatch them out of the fires of hell. We help save that soul from death by going after them and converting them back to the Lord, turning them back from the error of their ways. We all have this responsibility as faithful Christians. It's not just a challenge that God has thrown out there. He's not saying, it'd be good if you would go after those who leave the Lord. No, he says, brethren, you go after them. And it's a command that we need to take seriously. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Galatians 6, verse 1. We are our brother's keeper. And there's a consolation in this. He says, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way, you see, let him know. Here's our consolation. You can know, number one, I've obeyed God. And number two, I've converted a sinner from the error of his ways. It's like we've thrown the life preserver that Jesus the Savior gives us to throw to them. Jesus is the Savior, but we get to cooperate with the Savior in rescuing our brother or our sister from the world. So what's the result? We've seen the rebellion. We've seen the remedy. It's conversion. What's the result of conversion? He says, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and hide or cover a multitude of sins. Saving a soul from death. This is work that has eternal consequences. I mean, you think about the work of Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett or some of these billionaires, Bill Gates. It seems that they've done a lot of work and amassed a lot of money in a short time. And the world recognizes their tremendous money-making skills and what they've been able to do to change our world. But when they die, they don't leave as billionaires. They leave their money here. There have been several billionaires who have died recently. In fact, one of the men who worked with Bill Gates, he died and left all his billions. Ross Perot died and left his billions. And so we don't get to take it with us. But there is something we can do here, and we can be very poor when it comes to money, and yet do something that will affect people for eternity. And one of those things is going after brothers or sisters that wander away from the Lord, wander away from the church, wander away from the truth. We're to go and convert them, and we save their soul from death by making sure that they stay true to the Savior, who will save them from their sins now and save them eternally from hell and in a place where it is far better than anything we have here. The Bible teaches that the erring Christian will even have a more severe punishment than just a non-Christian who never knows the Lord. I mean, hell is going to be terrible for everybody. But to know the Lord and give it all up to go back to the world is worse than a dog returning to its vomit. Worse than a sow having washed to go back to wallowing in the mire. And the latter end is worse than the beginning. We read in verses like Luke 12, 47 and 48 that there are degrees of punishment. To have the light and turn back to darkness is such a sin against the light. It's like the lifeguard throwing us a life preserver and we say we don't want it. And when we drown as a result, it's our fault. And we deserve the sore punishment. Hebrews 10 verses 26 through 31 tells Christians that if they turn away from the truth, there's a certain fiery indignation that shall devour the adversaries. We can look forward to that. A fiery indignation where God has a special punishment for those that would turn away from his grace and count it cheap and count the blood whereby they've been sanctified an unholy thing and crucify the Lord afresh. John 15 verses 1 through 6 says that God will gather unfaithful Christians together and burn them in the fire. And so we look at the sins and we find that let the person know that the one who converts the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death and shall hide a multitude of sins. This is a wonderful thing to contemplate, because sins that are hidden or covered are the sins that of the brother who erred from the truth. He left the truth, and when he repents and confesses and prays for forgiveness, those sins are covered by the blood of Christ. Romans 4 verse 7. Now notice this. The sins that are under consideration here are the sins of the one who wandered away from the truth. They've rebelled. They went from practicing as a saint to going back and practicing as a sinner. They're living life as a sinful practice now. They've gone from living the life of a righteous person, and now they're living as a rebellious person. This is a person who did at one time love the truth, and now they are leaving the truth. And so we've got to go after these people. I think about the shepherd's staff. It has a crook on the end of it, and that's to rescue those lambs who are perishing. We have a song we sing, rescue the perishing, care for the dying. Jesus is merciful. Jesus will save. And so we need to go out and snatch them out of the fire. Now, what about the sins of the faithful Christian? Are we saying that the only sinners are those who leave the Lord? No, we're not. A faithful Christian still sins. Not deliberately, not out of rebellion, but because we're human. And often we sin and fall short of the glory of God. In fact, we all do that, Romans 3:23. There's a difference in sinning out of weakness and sinning out of high-handed, presumptuous rebellion. You see, the Christian who struggles with sin is the one who's fighting the good fight of faith. Sometimes they win battles, sometimes they lose battles, but they're not losing the war. The one who throws in the towel and no longer even tries to live for the Lord is surrendering to the devil, surrendering to the enemy of God. And this person doesn't have their sins covered. They need to be converted because they've wandered from the truth. You see, there's a verse in Romans 4 verse 8 that quotes Psalm 32, blessed is the man whose sins are covered